The Arctic does not erupt into conflict the way history remembers wars beginning. There are no sudden invasions, no parades of troops crossing borders at dawn, no declarations broadcast to the world. Instead, the Arctic changes quietly. Ice thins, maps are redrawn, satellites shift their orbits slightly north, radar systems stay awake a little longer. By the time the world realizes the Arctic has become a battlefield, the battle lines are already in place. At the center of those lines, silent, vast, and often forgotten, lies Alaska. For generations, Americans believed geography protected them. Two oceans, friendly neighbors, a sense that danger had to cross thousands of miles before it could arrive. That belief shaped policy, culture, and even psychology. Wars happened over there. Threats emerged somewhere else. Distance meant safety. But the Arctic collapses distance. From the top of the world, the United States is not far away at all. From Russia's eastern coast to Alaska, the gap is just 55 miles. On a clear day, the domed islands allow you to see one continent from the other. During the Cold War, American and Soviet soldiers stood facing each other across that frozen divide, close enough to wave. In the Arctic, the Earth's curvature works against the old assumptions of safety. The shortest path between nuclear superpowers does not run across oceans. It runs over the pole. Missiles launched from Eurasia reach North America fastest by crossing Arctic skis. Bombers follow the same routes. Satellites pass overhead. Submarines slip beneath the ice. This is not a future scenario. It has been military reality for decades. What has changed is that the Arctic is no longer frozen solid enough to remain quiet. For most of modern history, the Arctic was treated as a natural barrier rather than a strategic domain. Its extreme cold destroyed machinery. Its darkness disoriented pilots. Its ice crushed ships and swallowed expeditions whole. Even during World War II, the Arctic remained largely peripheral, important for supply convoys, dangerous for navigation, but not central to global power. The Cold War altered that perception. Suddenly, the Arctic became the most direct path between Washington and Moscow. Early warning radar lines were built across Alaska and northern Canada. Strategic bombers rehearsed polar routes. Nuclear submarines began patrolling under ice caps where detection was nearly impossible. Still, once the Soviet Union collapsed, attention drifted south again. Bases were downsized. Budgets were cut. The Arctic faded from public consciousness. It was assumed the ice would always be there. That assumption was wrong. Climate change is often discussed in terms of weather, ecosystems, and rising sea levels. But in the Arctic, climate change is not just environmental, it is geopolitical. The Arctic is warming nearly 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. Summer sea ice shrinks year after year. What was once a permanent ice cover is becoming seasonal. This transformation has consequences far beyond polar bears and melting glaciers. As ice retreats, shipping routes open for longer periods. Resource extraction becomes economically viable. Military access expands. Territorial claims intensify. The Arctic Ocean, once locked behind impassable ice, is becoming navigable. And navigable oceans invite competition. The northern sea route along Russia's coast can cut weeks off shipping times between Asia and Europe. The Northwest Passage through Canada and Alaska offers similar promise. Control of these routes means influence over global trade flows. Where trade flows, power follows. Alaska occupies a position unlike any other American territory. It is simultaneously North America's northernmost land, the closest U.S. territory to Russia, America's gateway to the Arctic, a forward observation post for 2 continents. On a map, Alaska appears distant, an inset box pushed to the side. In reality, it is central to global strategy. From Alaska, the United States can detect missile launches within seconds, intercept hostile aircraft before they reach populated areas, monitor Arctic shipping and submarine activity, project air and naval power across the polar region. Without Alaska, America's Arctic posture collapses into reaction instead of prevention. That is why military planners do not see Alaska as remote. They see it as exposed. When Secretary of State William Seward negotiated the purchase of Alaska from Russia in 1867, critics mocked the deal relentlessly. Seward's folly, they called it. An icy wasteland, a useless expanse of snow and darkness. At the time, few could imagine Alaska's value. Gold had not yet been discovered, oil lay hidden beneath frozen ground, and global strategy had not yet reached the sky. But history has a way of revealing meaning slowly. Alaska would later prove invaluable during World War II, when Japanese forces briefly occupied parts of the Aleutian Islands, bringing war directly to U.S. soil. During the Cold War, Alaska became one of the most heavily fortified regions on Earth. Today, it stands once again at the center of history, this time as the anchor of America's Arctic defense. Military strategists often speak of high ground. In traditional warfare, high ground means elevation. Whoever holds its seas farther reacts faster and controls movement below. In the modern world, the Arctic is high ground, not in altitude, but in strategic position. From the Arctic, missiles travel the shortest distance. Satellites have optimal coverage. Radar systems see threats first. Submarines operate with maximum concealment. Control of the Arctic does not guarantee victory, but losing it guarantees vulnerability. This is why the Arctic is no longer ignored by global powers. It is studied, mapped, militarized. Unlike other regions, the Arctic does not host massive troop deployments or constant visible conflict. Its militarization is subtle. Radar installations blend into tundra. Runways appear where ice once lay untouched. Icebreakers carry sensors as well as supplies. Military exercises increase in frequency and complexity, often framed as search and rescue or scientific cooperation. But beneath these narratives lies preparation. Preparation for a future where the Arctic is no longer neutral ground. Despite its growing importance, the Arctic remains a blind spot for much of the American public. News cycles focus on the South China Sea, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. Political debates revolve around borders thousands of miles away. Meanwhile, the northern frontier transforms quietly. Infrastructure built decades ago strains under modern demands. Ice-hardened fleets lag behind competitors. Communication networks face interference from space weather and geomagnetic storms. Alaska's vastness amplifies every challenge. Supplying a base can take weeks. Rescuing downed aircraft can take days. Operating in winter requires a level of training most forces never experience. Yet this is where America must be ready, because adversaries already are. For a brief moment after the Cold War, the idea of great power conflict seemed outdated. Globalization promised cooperation. Markets replaced militaries. Borders softened. That moment has ended. Russia sees the Arctic as a legacy domain, a place where it never fully retreated and where it holds natural advantages. China sees it as an opportunity, a region where influence can be built from scratch. The United States sees it as both a responsibility and a risk. And Alaska stands between all three. Frontiers are not defined by emptiness. They are defined by uncertainty. The Arctic is once again a frontier, not of exploration but of power. Its future will be shaped not by explorers planting flags, but by decisions made in war rooms, research labs, and command centers buried deep beneath frozen ground. Alaska will not decide that future alone. But without Alaska, America will not decide it at all. The ice is thinning, the silence is breaking, and the world's coldest region is heating up. When the Soviet Union collapsed, much of the world assumed Russia retreated with it. Bases were abandoned. Budgets collapsed. Soldiers went unpaid. Ice-covered airfields rusted into silence. From the outside, it looked like defeat. But in the Arctic, Russia never truly left. The North was never just territory to Moscow. It was identity, survival, and strategic depth. Long before climate change opened sea lanes, Russia understood that whoever controlled the Arctic controlled the shortest routes between continents. While the West looked away in the 1990s, Russia watched the ice. And when the ice began to retreat, Moscow was ready. No nation is more shaped by Arctic geography than Russia. Nearly half of the Arctic coastline belongs to it. Millions of Russians live above the Arctic Circle, working, building, serving. Entire cities exist where Western planners once believed human settlement was impossible. For Russia, the Arctic is not exotic. It is home. This gives Moscow something the United States lacks: institutional Arctic memory. Russian pilots train in polar night conditions from the start. Naval crews learn to operate in freezing seas as a baseline skill. Engineers design equipment not to survive cold, but to function because of it. The Arctic is not an obstacle to Russia. It is an advantage. By the early 2000s, Russia's leadership reached a conclusion. The post-Cold War pause was over. Oil and gas revenues refueled the state. Military reform accelerated, and the Arctic re-emerged as a pillar of national strategy. In 2008, Russia formally declared the Arctic a zone of strategic interest. That declaration was not symbolic. It marked the beginning of one of the most comprehensive Arctic militarization efforts in modern history. Across Russia's northern frontier, abandoned Soviet installations were resurrected. Air bases once buried in snow were rebuilt with modern runways. New radar systems replaced analog relics. Missile defense platforms were positioned where bombers once stood idle. Some bases were entirely new, engineered directly into permafrost. From the air, they appear almost surreal, brightly colored, geometric structures rising from endless white. Beneath them lie fuel reserves, command centers, and hardened shelters designed to withstand extreme cold and potential attack. These are not temporary outposts. They are permanent. Russia is not preparing to visit the Arctic. It is preparing to control it. At the heart of Russia's Arctic power lies the Northern Fleet. Stationed primarily on the Kola Peninsula, the Northern Fleet is Russia's most important naval force. It includes nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, vessels designed not to fight battles, but to guarantee retaliation. These submarines operate beneath Arctic ice where detection is extremely difficult. Ice cover masks acoustic signatures. Satellite tracking becomes unreliable. Enemy navies are forced into a game of shadows. This is deterrence at its most silent. From these positions, Russian submarines can launch missiles that cross the pole and reach North America in minutes. Alaska sits directly in that arc. In Arctic warfare, time is measured in minutes, not hours. A missile launched from northern Russia reaches U.S. radar systems first through Alaska. That makes Alaska the United States' earliest warning and its narrowest margin for response. Russia understands this. Modern Russian missile systems are designed specifically for polar routes. Hypersonic glide vehicles maneuver unpredictably, reducing interception windows. Submarine-launched missiles exploit ice-covered launch zones that complicate detection. The Arctic compresses decision-making. There is no room for hesitation. No symbol better captures Russia's Arctic dominance than its icebreaker fleet. Russia operates more icebreakers than the rest of the world combined, including nuclear-powered vessels capable of smashing through meters-thick ice year-round. Officially, these ships support commerce and research. Strategically, they are instruments of control. Icebreakers determine who moves when and where in Arctic waters. They escort military vessels, protect shipping lanes, and enable year-round access to regions others can reach only seasonally. The United States, by comparison, has struggled to maintain even a minimal icebreaker fleet. In the Arctic, mobility is power. Russia has both. One of Russia's boldest Arctic moves is its claim over the Northern Sea Route, a shipping lane running along its Arctic coastline. As ice retreats, this route becomes increasingly viable. Russia requires foreign vessels to notify authorities, take Russian pilots aboard, and comply with regulations Moscow enforces. To Russia, this is internal water. To others, it is international. This disagreement is not theoretical. It is enforced by ships, aircraft, and law. Control of the Northern Sea Route gives Russia leverage over global trade, especially between Asia and Europe. It also provides a logistical backbone for military resupply across the Arctic. Every convoy strengthens Moscow's claim. Russian bombers regularly fly Arctic patrols. Tu-95 and Tu-160 aircraft, some designed during the Cold War, still probe North American airspace. They approach Alaska's Air Defense Identification Zone, testing response times, radar coverage, and interception readiness. These flights are deliberate. They are messages. Every intercept is a rehearsal. Every radar lock is data collected. For Alaska-based U.S. pilots, Arctic intercepts are among the most demanding missions imaginable, conducted in darkness, extreme cold, and vast empty skies. This is where mistakes become fatal. Russia's Arctic buildup is not limited to conventional forces. Electronic warfare systems interfere with communications. GPS signals degrade or vanish. Satellites face increased monitoring and potential disruption. The Arctic is becoming a contested, electromagnetic environment. In modern warfare, controlling information is as important as controlling territory. Russia is building that capability into the ice. From Alaska, Russia is not an abstract threat. It is visible. U.S. radar installations track Russian launches. Satellites relay movement data. Pilots scramble from Alaskan bases to meet approaching aircraft. The distance between Russian bases and American soil is shorter in the Arctic than anywhere else on Earth. This proximity changes everything. It eliminates buffer zones. It compresses response times. It raises the stakes of miscalculation. In the Arctic, escalation would be immediate. Russia's Arctic posture is not only military, it is psychological. It signals endurance. Where others struggle to operate, Russia thrives. Where infrastructure collapses under cold, Russian systems persist. This reinforces a narrative Moscow values deeply: that Russia is uniquely suited to dominate the North. That belief shapes policy. And belief in geopolitics often matters as much as capability. What once would have sparked alarm now passes with routine familiarity. Another Arctic patrol. Another base expansion. Another exercise near contested waters. Normalization is dangerous. Because when militarization becomes routine, escalation becomes easier. The Arctic is slipping into that pattern. Every Russian base built in the Arctic casts a longer shadow toward Alaska. Every new missile system shortens warning time. Every submarine patrol increases uncertainty. Alaska is no longer just America's northern frontier. It is America's front row seat to Russia's Arctic revival. And this revival is not slowing. It is accelerating. Russia believes the Arctic belongs to those who arrive first and stay longest. The ice is retreating. The competition is arriving. And the North is no longer silent. But Russia is no longer alone in the Arctic. Because as Moscow reasserts itself, another power, thousands of miles away, has begun to move quietly toward the ice. And its interest is no less strategic. China has no Arctic coastline, no frozen ports, no polar cities, no historical claim rooted in geography. And yet, in the last 2 decades, no non-Arctic nation has moved more deliberately toward the top of the world. Beijing refers to itself as a near-Arctic state. The phrase is carefully chosen. It implies relevance without requiring proximity. It frames interest as natural rather than ambitious. But in geopolitics, words are rarely accidental. China's Arctic strategy is not about the ice itself. It is about what the ice reveals. For China, the Arctic represents a fundamental shift in global geography. Traditional maritime trade routes funnel Chinese exports through narrow choke points, most notably the Strait of Malacca. These routes are long, vulnerable, and heavily influenced by U.S. naval power. The Arctic changes that equation. As ice retreats, polar routes offer shorter paths to Europe and North America. Weeks are shaved off transit times. Fuel costs drop. Strategic exposure decreases. What was once impossible becomes inevitable. The Arctic does not just shorten trade routes. It rebalances power. China's Arctic presence begins with science. Research stations in Svalbard and Iceland. Ice-capable research vessels navigating polar waters. Scientific papers on ice thickness, currents, seabed composition, and atmospheric behavior. All legitimate, all valuable, and all dual use. In modern geopolitics, scientific data is not neutral. Bathymetric surveys map seafloors for submarine navigation. Ice modeling improves under-ice movement. Atmospheric data enhances missile trajectory prediction and satellite reliability. What looks like climate research can quietly support military planning. China understands this better than most. In 2018, China formally integrated the Arctic into its Belt and Road Initiative. The concept was rebranded as the Polar Silk Road. This was not a symbolic move. It signaled that the Arctic would be treated like any other strategic corridor, worthy of investment, infrastructure, and long-term planning. Ports, shipping insurance, logistics hubs, and digital infrastructure followed. China does not rush development. It builds layers. Once those layers exist, influence becomes permanent. Chinese investment in Arctic and near-Arctic infrastructure stretches across multiple countries. Ports in Northern Europe, mining ventures in Greenland, fiber optic cable proposals running across the Arctic seabed. Each project is civilian. Each project is legal. Each project creates dependency. Control is not seized. It is accumulated. Undersea cables, in particular, represent strategic leverage. They carry financial transactions, communications, and data flows critical to modern economies. In conflict, those cables become pressure points. Alaska watches these developments carefully. Because cables laid today can become choke points tomorrow. China lacks Russia's vast icebreaker fleet, but it is building capability rapidly. New ice-capable vessels extend China's reach deeper into polar waters. Research ships stay longer. Routes become familiar. Experience accumulates. Presence creates legitimacy. The more often a nation operates in a region, the harder it becomes to exclude it. China is patient. It does not seek dominance overnight. It seeks normalization. China's Arctic strategy rarely wears a uniform. There are no Chinese bases openly bristling with weapons above the Arctic Circle, no overt troop deployments. Instead, there is data, infrastructure, commercial presence. This ambiguity is intentional. It avoids confrontation while enabling preparation. In a future crisis, civilian assets can be repurposed. Commercial satellites provide targeting data. Research vessels assist naval operations. The line between civilian and military blurs. By the time it matters, the groundwork is already laid. From Washington, China's Arctic activity raises uncomfortable questions. What happens when a non-Arctic power gains influence over Arctic trade routes? What happens when Chinese infrastructure supports Russian Arctic ambitions? What happens when U.S. early warning systems must consider not one competitor, but two? Alaska becomes the focal point. It is where Russian capability and Chinese ambition converge. From Alaska, China is not a visible threat. There are no regular intercepts, no aircraft probing airspace, no submarines surfacing beneath the ice. What exists instead is strategic inevitability. China's economic gravity pulls it northward. The Arctic offers what China values most: efficiency, access, and leverage. Alaska sits between China's Arctic aspirations and America's defenses. Unlike Russia, China does not seek to dominate the Arctic militarily, at least not openly. It seeks to make itself indispensable. A partner, an investor, a provider of technology and capital. But dependency is power, and power reshapes outcomes quietly. China plans in decades. Its Arctic approach reflects that mindset. Every research expedition trains future experts. Every investment builds relationships. Every voyage adds familiarity with ice, weather, and terrain. This is not preparation for a single conflict. It is preparation for a future where the Arctic matters as much as any ocean. As China embeds itself in the Arctic, Alaska's role becomes more complex. The U.S. must monitor not just military threats, but economic and technological influence. Infrastructure competition matters as much as missile defense. The Arctic is becoming crowded, and crowded frontiers are unstable. China's arrival in the Arctic completes the triangle. Russia brings geography and force. China brings capital and patience. The United States brings responsibility and vulnerability. Alaska stands where these forces meet. What comes next will depend on how America responds. Because defending the Arctic is not just about soldiers and ships. It is about infrastructure, alliances, and time. And time in the Arctic is melting away. Across Alaska's vast emptiness lies one of America's most critical defense networks. Radar stations stare north, scanning skies few civilians ever see. Missile defense interceptors sit underground, waiting for threats that may never come, but must always be expected. Fort Greely houses the only U.S. system designed to stop an intercontinental ballistic missile mid-flight. Elmendorf-Richardson launches fighters that intercept foreign aircraft long before they approach populated areas. This is where America buys time. Minutes of warning, seconds of decision. In Arctic warfare, that margin can mean survival. Alaska is not defended because war is expected tomorrow. It is defended because if war ever comes, there will be no second chance. The Arctic has no clear referee. International law struggles to keep pace with melting ice. Continental shelf claims overlap. Shipping lanes blur the line between national control and international access. Military exercises increase. Airspace encounters grow more frequent. Communication failures become more dangerous. In the Arctic, mistakes are amplified. Rescue is slow. Escalation is fast. Silence hides intent. Every nation insists it seeks stability while preparing for conflict. This is how arms races begin. Quietly, legally, inevitably. The Arctic will not dominate headlines until it dominates outcomes. Control of the Arctic means control of the shortest military routes, influence over future global trade, access to untapped resources, strategic high ground over the planet. Alaska stands at the center of that equation, not as a distant outpost, but as America's frontline. The ice is retreating, competition is advancing, and the future of power is shifting north. The Arctic is no longer the edge of the world. It is the center of what comes next.